I'd be very, very happy to come along again, though you may want to reverse that invite by the time I get to the end of this. Please don't do the show of hands before I've left. I would say as well, if anyone's interested, you can sign up for our monthly labour market information updates that we do each month for free on the new stats as they come out. And also, if you go to the report section of our website and search for coronavirus, you'll find 12 reports on a range of topics like the impact on older workers, something upcoming on lone parents, impact on local economies, and etc. etc. There's a whole wealth of stuff there. I think there is about 12 reports and more on the way. So sign up for free or go and have a look if any of those topics are of interest. I am now going to attempt to share some slides, and at this point I apologise if I accidentally crash the entire call, which is entirely possible given my lack of IT skills on doing this. Now I can't see any of you. Can somebody say if you can see a slide at the moment, please?
Yes, we can. Yes.
Excellent, thank you. I may never get out of these slides now. So as Elizabeth mentioned at the start, we published a report a week or so ago called Time to Act, and Dave Simmons worked on that with us, and I think he spoke to several of you about it. So I thought I'd just kind of run through a couple of findings because it affects what you've been talking about so far there, and also what we've been doing in terms of next steps and thinking about what Faye was talking about shaping the commissioning and what should support look like. So this basically throughout this crisis, there's a series of graphs heading sharply in the wrong direction. So this is one that I've picked out that estimates, these are our estimates of what might happen to levels of long-term, a different set of scenarios. So we've taken Office for Budget Responsibility projections, and we've said they've got an upside, a downside, and a central case. And we've said, well, what happens if you plug those in and then you look at a recovery in the labour market that's a bit slower than the OBR projects. So numbers go up and then recovery is a bit slower than they expect, because when they published these projections back in the spring, I think it was, they were a little bit V-shapey. Everyone was feeling, they were feeling very optimistic at the time. And when they publish their new stats next week, I think they'll find themselves feeling a bit more pessimistic. So what you see is on any of these scenarios, massive spike up in long-term unemployment in spring 2021. Not unsurprising, given that we had a big spike in unemployment in spring 2020. So we're defining long-term unemployment as out of work for 12 months or more, and you get these huge increases. If I had the time series back, you would see that these are sort of heading up to early 1990s levels. And then, I mean, that rise in spring 2021 is baked in. It's going to happen because we had the rise in unemployment this spring. Economy recovered a bit over the summer. We then worked out you can't just wish away global pandemics, and so we had to start shutting down the economy again. So these figures for spring next year are what they are really within that range. I think the uncertainty is about the years thereafter, and a couple of things. One is what happens to all those furloughed workers. Still probably something like 2.5 million people furloughed. That will probably go up to more like 3.5 million now that the scheme has been extended at the last minute. But at some point that scheme will end, and at some point some of those furloughed workers will lose their jobs. Second uncertainty is what happens to the economy as we head into 2021 and beyond. And that's, first of all, what happens with pandemics. We've got some good news on the vaccine front today, but it's early days. Also, we kind of haven't mentioned Brexit for a while, you know, what happens with Brexit and a whole bunch of other stuff. But even when you get a rapid recovery in the economy, in the last 3 recessions, it has taken 3 to 7 years for unemployment to recover back to pre-recession levels. So it feels like we're going to get this big spike in spring 2021 in long-term unemployment, and then probably some form of decline, maybe a second spike, depending on what happens to those who are furloughed. But long-term unemployment is going to be here with us for several years to come at much higher levels than we've been used to. So that was the first point. Second point is that this varies significantly across different parts of the UK. So we've put in some illustrative geographical areas here. And you can see the last recession peak in that second column there, and then the upside, central case and downside scenarios based on what might happen to levels of unemployment to start with, and then how quickly it might recover based on what happened in previous recessions. So you can kind of see there how these impacts might vary across different parts of the UK. And it's worth saying, I mentioned that next Wednesday, alongside the spending review, we'll get updated forecasts from the OBR. So we're going to rerun these figures based on their updated forecasts. My expectation would be that we'll still get, as I say, that peak in spring 2021, but we might then get a lower peak thereafter because we've extended the furlough scheme, but that lower peak will last for longer because the V-shapers have gone a bit quiet in recent times. So it will change the shape of this, but not the scale of the challenge compared to what we've been used to. So we're going to rerun those numbers for the UK, also for these local areas, and we're going to add in a few more local areas as well, just to be determined at this time. So there'll be some more data on its way from us based on those forecasts. And then the policy and delivery challenges. So what we've got here is a couple of figures for early monthly referrals to the work programme, so in the first month and then in the first few months, and then compared to what we're projecting for those three different scenarios for the first 3 months of 21-22. And what you can see quite clearly is even on the upside scenario, where things go pretty well overall in the economy, the numbers of people becoming long-term unemployed in April and May next year look to be bigger than the numbers referred to the work programme during those first few months. And those of you, sort of a few familiar faces on the call, those of you who are involved in that will know quite what a peak that was at the start of the work programme. So that says to me we need something that's in place quickly and can scale up and can flex up and down depending on what happens to patterns of long-term unemployment, because we've got so much uncertainty. We're going to have high peaks, troughs, maybe a second spike. We need to be flexible and adaptive to these things. And also, April 2021 isn't very far away, particularly, as you will all know better than me, in terms of even if we had contract award for something very soon, actually getting it up and running and up to scale in that period of time with Christmas in the middle, challenging. So that's the kind of pattern of delivery. I guess the other thing I'd say is the figures I've got here for April, May and June next year, this is total long-term unemployment. This isn't just people who are on benefits. So actual referrals to a programme you would expect to be lower than this, but I'm going to come on to that point in a second, but just to set it into context. So that was the first report that we did a week or so ago. We're going to publish another report before the spending review, which gives a few thoughts and ideas about, given the scale of that challenge, what should we actually do? And I'll come back in a moment to what relation to DWP's plans that bears. So I think the important points for me, first of all, eligibility. So for me, support for the long-term unemployed should be support for the long-term unemployed, not just those who are on benefits for 12 months plus. So I think there's a particular point here around people who are out of work but not claiming benefits. There's a point about some 16 and 17-year-olds who are not eligible in most cases for universal credit. And there's a point as well about once we get through to March next year, there are going to be some people who've been furloughed for 12 months. So we've created a whole new category of sort of long-term furloughed. And for me, that period of furloughing should be a contributory factor to the support that you get if you then lose your job. So that's a point about eligibility. There's a point about service guarantees. So I'll kind of come on to this a bit more in a second. But for me, it sounds from what I've picked up, be interesting to hear from the group, that the days of a sort of pure black box, if you like, seem to be kind of gone, at least for now. And a sort of more grey box seems to be where we're heading. So if we are going to have some service guarantees, which I think is a good idea, what should those be in terms of regularity of contact, in terms of lots of other things? I would say, given that probably half of those who are long-term unemployed, something a third to a half, will have low literacy or numeracy, and that even the best employment programs, you're still going to get half the people are not in sustained employment by the end. Wouldn't it be good if we could guarantee to improve their basic skills during that period of time? Then there's a third part about, well, what does this support look like? Do we want to be a bit more prescriptive? I say we as commissioners and we as delivery people, delivery organisations, about what that involves and about some of the options that are available. And for me, I guess the key thing I wanted to get across here is that for me, this support is not just about commissioning a programme. Support for the long-term unemployed is much wider than that. So, for example, we'll be talking in our report about recruitment subsidies for employers taking on long-term unemployed people. I would say there's a case for what we've called here Kickstart Plus, because everything's better with a plus after it. So Kickstart jobs for those long-term unemployed people aged 25 plus, not just for young people. And Kickstart, in this case, focused on social value, more like the Future Jobs Fund. And then other forms of specialist provision as well. So I guess for me, when we're thinking about, as the Learning and Work Institute, when we're thinking about long-term unemployment, we're thinking of all those who are long-term unemployed, not just those on benefits. And we're thinking about what guarantees and what structure of support do we need versus flexibility to adapt that. And then we're also thinking about that wider set of support, including but not limited to commissioning a programme. So that kind of looks a little bit different to what I'm sure we're all expecting DWP to start commissioning once the Chancellor announces next week that they're going to do something. So I guess what I'm interested in is people's views on some of the things that I've got in here on these questions, which I'll run through in a second, but also the extent to which, given that DWP are not going to do exactly what I've talked about, to what extent can we get closer to that or build other provision together to get us closer to that wider offer for more people? So first thing I'm interested in is about sort of model and that sort of service guarantees versus black box and sort of views on that. Feels to me like we're heading towards a grey box somewhere in the middle. Is that right? Is that not right? Second, about commissioning levels. We had sort of tentative steps towards some form of devolution, didn't we, with the work and health programme, certainly in terms of joint commissioning responsibilities for London and Greater Manchester. It feels like we're sort of stepping back on that. And we had a roundtable with a number of local authorities last week, and you can imagine their opinions about that. But sort of national commissioning versus local leadership, and is it really a step back, or is the DWP leading the way the right thing to do? Point about reach. So I talked about, in my view, it should be all those who are long-term unemployed, not just those on benefits. Feels likely we're going to get a benefit-based programme. How could we get beyond that if you agree that we should? Geography, you can head down a rabbit hole about size of CPAs. So we probably need another sort of 3-day meeting rather than sort of next half hour. But I think sort of point about geography and how you get closer to functional economic areas would be my personal view. And then length of support. So work programme, we had people on programmes for 2 years. Feels to me that was partly due to how DWP accounted for budgets in their deal with the Treasury. But would shorter support work better? Or is that 2 year, was that the right thing to do actually? So I guess there's kind of a whole set of questions there. What we're interested in, what I'm interested in, is both what we think the right answer is. There isn't a right answer, but what's the sort of view amongst those on the call about some of these issues? And then secondly, assuming that there's some difference between that and what DWP is planning to do, to what extent, to go back to what Faye was saying, can we influence collectively what that looks like in terms of commissioning, and or in terms of delivery as well once something is commissioned. So that's kind of where we are. And as I say, we want to publish a report in the next week or so before the spending review, and then do further work afterwards on rerunning the numbers and also thinking about what programmes look like, what support looks like, furthering this policy thinking. So very keen to work with you all beyond today and beyond this report, but also any thoughts today will be very helpful in finalising the thinking on that report as well. So I'm going to stop there and endeavour to come out of this screen sharing, but without accidentally kicking myself off the call. So I'll hand back to you, Elizabeth, while I try and work out how to do that.
Okay, I'm actually wondering whether we should leave up some areas for discussion, Stephen.
Well, that would certainly be easier for me to do.
Yeah, leave it up, leave it up. And then what we will do is invite people to raise their hands and come in and work our way through that. So I have a little bit of trouble with my own screen. So do we have? I think we have a hand raised. I can't see who it is. It's almost as if it's me. Oh dear, how embarrassing. Caroline Fox, please come in. Yeah.
I'm speaking and you can't hear me. That makes a change. I think we're all a bit shell-shocked from so many meetings. That's why everybody's silent when they're asked a question. I was just interested in the policy around the Kickstart Plus, what your thinking is around that, and what sort of age groups, where the need is really moving forward. Just a simple question on that. Yeah, so.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I think what we're thinking is by the time someone's been out of work for 12 months, they've already been around the cycle of various things. So you kind of need a bit of a fresh start. And hence, if I can pop back to this, so some form of almost restart type process for that sort of 12 to 15 months out of work. And then when you've hit that 15-month point, if you still haven't got and sustained a job, then you head into that choices box, one of which is Kickstart. I think, and this is based on the fact that we know that for some people, particularly those with the weakest work experience history or lowest levels of qualifications, or maybe who are wanting to switch across to a new sector and don't have experience in that sector, that some form of paid placement effectively can make a difference. We know that from Future Jobs Fund for young people in the previous recession, but also from things we've evaluated, like the Solent City deal, where they were looking at people with health problems and disabilities who'd been out long-term unemployed, and sort of looking at almost like an intermediate labour market type model. So I think it would be for people, along with their advisor, to work out which of those choices is the best one for them to help them get that sustained job at the end of it. But those are the sorts of things that you'd be looking at.
I don't know if people remember JMA. Do you remember that? That was a sort of 3-day motivation program. It was around pathway days, and it was more about motivating people to sort of do something, to try something new, or just to move out of unemployment. And that was a 3-day, quite intensive, come on, let's get you motivated programs. I don't know whether anybody's got any experience of delivering that, but that was quite a few years ago.
And just to add, I mean, because some of this is based on what worked well and what didn't work so well for the work program. Some of it as well, people may be thinking about new deals and things like that. And I think there were 5 options in the new deal, so this has got one more, and therefore is better by definition. We've got one more, but it's kind of trying to learn from some of those previous programs, such as what you were mentioning there, and make sure people are there's always something happening or something for them to do, but it has to be useful and leading on hopefully to a sustained employment outcome.
Okay, I really like the idea that people get choices. Anyway, I'll keep quiet. Faye Thomas, I can see that your hand's raised.
I'll put my hand down now. Hi, Stephen. So I had a couple of comments really. The level, national versus local CPA area. I think there's room for both. And I suppose really it's defined by the level of support that's required, and also, you know, the value for money in terms of how cost effective it is to deliver a national type programme and who's involved in that. I suppose for me, having worked on both types of programmes, like many others on the call, the relationship probably is key between the prime and the subcontractors on a national level. And that's defined primarily by the funding model, so it's very cyclical. How does that all fit together? But it really is about meeting the need of the various groups of unemployed people. In terms of length of time, having worked on programmes such as many others were spoken about and Caroline mentioned, those programmes that have the ability to offer the participants a longer length of time often do deliver, as we know, high levels of long-term sustainability, or 12 months and beyond. CAEHRS is a good example of that, specialist employment support, which has evolved and morphed into ERSA and really did have significant impact for those people that placed into long-term work, not just the cycle of low pay unemployed. So I would be encouraged for a programme or programmes that allowed flexibility for short interventions, but also where the individual participant needed it, longer term support, which often can be quite complex and need a number of people to provide the support for the person to sustain for long term. But my biggest query really in all of this, and I put this back to you, Stephen, really is does this marry with a stimulus for jobs, for growth and for self-employment? Because, you know, many people on this call and organisations have been able to support, you know, hundreds of thousands of people into employment, but we are facing a crisis of where are the opportunities coming from? So whilst in Kickstart, for example, I've seen a number of very small micro-organisations jump at the opportunity, the sustainability of those options and where the young people are going to go afterwards is a worry of mine, even though I'm planning to be a gateway organisation. I've applied for it. So I suppose that's the question back really, and I'm interested to see what the spending review comes of that. Thank you.
Yeah, these are all good points as ever, Faye. And I think so my worry is that DWP are going to commission a programme for people who've been on benefits, unemployed on benefits for 12 months or something, and then, you know, sort of that will be it. Whereas actually that will exclude a whole bunch of people who are long-term unemployed but have not been claiming universal credit for 12 months for some of the groups I talked about. And second of all, won't give the right types of support for everybody because it will work for some and not for others. And that's why, oh, well, there you go, I've not put it on there. So click off that slide. But I think, so we have published another report called Emergency Exit, which is on that coronavirus bit of the Learning and Work Institute website I talked about, that says that if we're going to get the labour market working again, going to get the economy working again, and of course we have to do it in a safe way for public health, that we need employment support before people get made redundant, while they're short-term unemployed, when they're long-term unemployed. But we also need to think about how we support jobs in constrained sectors, particularly retail and hospitality, whilst we've got social distancing going on. And after a bit of a sort of hokey-cokey process, we've ended up back with the furlough scheme that we started with through to the end of March. And then also we need more action on job creation, which is one of the sort of points that you're getting at. So that's where Kickstart Plus comes in, because we just need to pay to create some jobs for some people because the economy is struggling. That's where the employer recruitment bonus comes from, because you're trying to sort of say, you're trying to make it more economically possible for employers to create jobs, and specifically for those who are long-term unemployed by giving them a bonus payment. And then we need loads more sort of macroeconomic stuff and infrastructure investment and incentives to create jobs and a whole bunch of other stuff like that. And that's kind of links into the other point really, which is that DWP can't do this stuff on its own. It needs to be part of industrial strategies, the Treasury's macroeconomic strategy, local industrial strategies that local government are putting in place, the infrastructure stuff that local government's doing, investment by housing associations. All of these things need to happen together and collaboratively, rather than it's DWP's job and they will design a programme and commission it and then someone will deliver it. And that's what I think is missing a little, or one of the things that I think is missing a little bit at the moment, is that sort of join up. And then, given that we are the Learning and Work Institute, I should talk about the join up between employment and skills a little bit, or lack thereof. So we put out a report 2 weeks ago that showed that 40% of adults had taken part in some form of lockdown learning. So this is not just formal courses, this is working out on the job how to share your screen via MS Teams. So I count in that stat now. But those full-time employees who are furloughed were less likely to take part in learning than non-furloughed workers, which just feels like the opposite of what reality should be. And particularly if you think about retraining and all those sorts of things. So it feels like retraining is a missing link in joining up employment and skills support more generally. And again, if your employment response is doubling the number of work coaches, which is great, doing JETs, which is great, and doing a programme for long-term benefit claimants, all of that's okay, but it's not enough in and of itself. It needs a wider response, and that's one of the points we're trying to get across really, and keen to work with others on as well. That was a long-winded way of saying I agree, Faye.
Okay, can we move on to Adrian Butcher? I can see you've had your hand raised. Do you want
Yes, typically, Elizabeth. Yeah, no, thank you. I looked on your previous slide, Stephen. I was mindful of this thing called special provisions, and one thing that occurs to me is, I think one thing that COVID will have brought about is, in sometimes it will have accelerated long-term trends in what the jobs are. So what I mean by that, for example, is we've seen tens of thousands of retail jobs go. One wonders if all of those will return, and therefore we're going to see different skills in higher demand. IT skills is the one that comes to mind. And I wonder if you're going to reach the situation where you might have programs that recognize that the cost of equipping people in some specialist fields is more than others, and deliberately skew funding per person on the basis of the kind of skills that they're acquiring and the likely value of those skills, both to the individual and the economy moving forwards. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, I mean, there's two things perhaps I'd say in response as well. So one is that there's definitely an accelerated structural change going on, but there's also some temporary changes going on. And part of the problem is we can't distinguish. It's impossible to distinguish between the two because we don't know. So, for example, there are going to be fewer prets in the future because fewer people are going to travel into the office so often as they used to. But some of those prets that are closed now will be viable once we get to vaccine or the treatments or whatever. And it's difficult to know which pret is which to use that. But it's obviously not just prets, it's all those other sectors that you talked about. So that's
I think
kind of one.
IT and green energy, for example.
Yeah, exactly. So for me, that's kind of, but there is clearly structural change going on. And we talked in the emergency exit report that I mentioned earlier, as well as a report we did jointly with Reform about career changes, about the fact we need lots more investment to accelerate that green jobs revolution. We're going to get some announcements via Zoom from his self-isolation from the Prime Minister this week on some of that. But that you need to directly link that onto employment support and how you get people into those jobs.
Yeah. What I mean is as well, if you're putting somebody into a fairly basic retail job, the training cost to do that is relatively minor. If you're putting somebody into a more technically demanding or knowledge demanding job, you might need to offer the employer more of a training pot in order to help him or her to get the new person of whatever age into that line of work.
So I agree, and that's where the lack of join up between what DWP is doing and what the DfE is doing around things like the lifetime skills guarantee, for example, is unhelpful at best, because those links, such as you just described, are not being made. And also, that's a level 3 qualification guarantee, whereas lots of, there's 9 million people in England alone who haven't got basic literacy and numeracy, and we kind of dropped off on support for those. So it's kind of, I think there's a big missing link about joining up that sectoral based stuff with the skills investment, with the employment support, and DBP can't do it on its own, and national government can't do it on its own either.
Okay.
Thank you. Caroline, I can see your hand still raised. Is that from before? Yeah. Does anybody else want to come in?
Yes,
now?
it is, Elizabeth. Sorry.
Yeah,
Got
right.
there in the end.
Yeah.
I was going to re-ask Stephen about the level 3, the lifetime guarantee. Do we know, is there going to be an announcement next week then? Is that the planning on that, or where are we with that?
Well, so it's going to come into effect from April, isn't it? Although not many courses start in April, but we're waiting. They've decided, the DfE's decided that we can't just let people do any level 3 that they choose to do. We should decide, or the DfE should decide, which qualifications will have the most value. So we're waiting for the list of qualifications that will get funded from it, which the last I heard was hopefully going to be shortly after the spending review. I think I do slightly worry that this sort of heads into, DfE civil servants trying to centrally plan the economy, which doesn't feel, it feels suboptimal to me, is one way of putting it. Whereas actually I'd say people and employers are in the best place to make decisions about what would benefit them most. But there you go. So yeah, we're kind of waiting for that announcement, hopefully just after the spending review, about which qualifications will be funded.
Great, thank you. I'll try and take my hand down.
Richard, see your hand up.
Ah, there you go.
Thank you, and hi Stephen, nice to see you again. I suppose the thought that occurs to me with the proposal that you've put forward is more around it's going to end up being political in a lot of respects, and in some respects we've already seen with Kickstart being as different as I could possibly get it from Future Jobs Fund, is that what you seem to be proposing, I could, playing devil's advocate, say that actually that's New Deal, and for all the right reasons as well, because I would agree that sort of worked as far as having a gateway and the options and everything else, and we know that that was successful. So do you think we'd win an argument, or you would win an argument to get them to take it up, with the political stance they seem to be making at the moment at a ministerial level?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I was very wary about ending up sort of reliving New Labour's greatest hits, which isn't a long-term career strategy for me, never mind anyone else. Yeah, which is why, so you're right, because Kickstart is obviously fundamentally very, very different from the wasteful Labour spending of Future Jobs Fund. Except it's pretty similar, except we've got a bit more private sector involvement, which may or may not be work out well. So I think what we're trying to describe in the paper is learning from lots of previous things, rather than saying, oh, the New Deal was good, wasn't it? But I think the point about choices, Elizabeth remarked on the language earlier, we deliberately tried to make it choices rather than obligations. We had the youth obligation, didn't we? Because the point is, we're trying to support people and empower them. There's something in here about enterprise. I know that was an option before as well, but people starting up their own businesses and the spirit of enterprise and all that sort of stuff. And then it's Kickstart rather than sort of Future Jobs Fund type thing. But there is a kind of there's a kind of risk around that sort of harking back to New Deal stuff. So we need to avoid, and we will try and avoid talking that sort of language. But I think there is also, DBP clearly decided they're going to do a work programme type thing with a slightly greyer box. So it's kind of, how does that fit with this? That's another political discussion. And there's a kind of pace point here as well, because that spike in long-term unemployment is coming in spring next year, whether we're ready or not. And they don't want anything to hold up their commissioning process, notwithstanding the fact that it's 8 months since the first people lost their jobs at the start of the crisis. So we could have done some of this a bit sooner. I've been writing reports called No Time to Lose for about 6 months, I think. And now it's time to act, which was this one. So I think there is a kind of speed point. And what we were thinking is that actually doing something like this, you can get it up and running really quickly. So you can kind of do your commissioning thing, you can do your larger program if you want, but actually you can do some of this stuff really quickly as well, building on what you've already got. So for me, the argument is partly this is learning from lots of different bits of evidence rather than just can we reinvent the New Deal. I need to be very careful about avoiding sounding like that. But also you can do it really quickly. You can be fleet of foot, you can flex it up, you can flex it down. You can do it in a sort of mixed economy type approach with some of it's job centre plus district led, some of it's bigger contract areas, some of it's local authority led. So I think for me that the flexibility hopefully would be one of the selling points. But you're right, it's a kind of real risk. I agree with the point you're making.
Yeah, no, I think you're also right with the direction of the department is that it is going to be more prescriptive in a lot of respects, and that seems to have come from the commissioning team or the commercial team within the department have a view of they've learned what worked in previous programs, so they're going to stipulate that and give some flexibility in other areas, which you can argue could be the right decision. I think we do need to be careful that once you actually start stipulating more, you're going to have to actually also stipulate what your expectations from that are, e.g. Performance levels, etc., and not actually lock yourselves in and get into a bidding war on who can propose the amount of jobs they can get. But again, that could be dangerous because we had set performance rates on New Deal, so you could end up going down that route as well. So, you know, it is difficult because we all know from the past there are some really good examples. There are bits that we'd all say could have been done better as well, I'm sure. But yeah, it is always a bit of a political risk. Anyway, that's enough from me anyway, Stephen. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Stephen Bell, I can see your hands raised.
Yeah, I'm just really interested, Stephen, in terms of the clear service guarantees and how far reaching you think that would be and what you hope to achieve by it.
Yeah, well, I think it goes back a bit to Richard's point. So we're clearly heading towards a greyer box with clearer service standards for customers. And I think that's based on a view that in the previous work programme, things got a little bit vaguer as time went on. I say this as somebody who worked for a work programme provider at the time, and also that this is a public service, so the public who are accessing it, should have a very clear sense about what they're entitled to, and I think that partly, you know, so contact. So will that be, you know, people should be spoken with, probably would be better. At least every 2 weeks, or is it going to be different to that? Or, you know, I'm sure there'll be stuff in there about green action plans, as there was in previous programmes anyway. But I would say as well, you know, as I said before, given that 50% of people at best are not going to have a sustained job by the end of the programme, surely we should make sure that we've helped them to improve their basic skills, given that that is about long-term and employability as well as about you know, kind of life in general as well. So I'd say it's partly about all of those sorts of things. I would also argue, they're definitely not going to do this bit. I would also argue that there should be extra components in there, whether it's payments or whether it's standards or whether it's performance measures or whatever, about once somebody's got into work, do they go on to either start an apprenticeship, or do they go on after they've sustained work for a bit to go on to an apprenticeship? You know, those sorts of things, whether there's guarantees to individuals about what you can expect as a citizen, or whether they're about performance measures or management indicators or something for how we judge how a service is performing. It's those sorts of things, rather than necessarily just letting providers bidding for a contract to set those things out. I guess, sorry, last point on that. I'm also saying that because for me, this isn't just about, it's clear broadly what DWP are going to do. So we could have just written a report that says, given they're going to do this, here's the best way to do it. But what we try to do is say, here's what we think should actually happen. And given that this isn't just for me about commissioning a programme and how you contract a programme, this is about how you get support to all those who are out of work 12 months plus, some clear sense about what people are entitled to and what they will get, I think is important. So that's kind of where we were coming from.
Yeah, no, I agree completely in terms of parity of equality of opportunity as well across geographies, and for it not to be at the whim of a regional office to say, oh, we're not focusing on the short-term unemployed, so we'll just drop the long-term unemployed. I think service standards are important. I think giving people expectations, but also setting the expectations what the service provider and the funder will have of the learner on that journey. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.
I'm very aware that we are at 3 o'clock. So there's two things. Gareth Matthews has got his hand raised, so I'll bring him in. And then Stephen, I just wanted to pose a question to you. Is there something that you want from this group this afternoon, sort of in conclusion? So I'll let you come in after Gareth.
Hi, Stephen. Long time. Stephen, I'm going to go a little bit historic on you and try and link up some of the bullet points. We've reminisced about the Labour days, but if you go back to the start of the Labour days, where you had employment zones, national-based large contract risk and reward, supported below that by action teams, locally based, voluntary, difficult clients, and the specialism about progress success. A tiered commissioning arrangement, structured, which hit a lot of you bullet points in a very sequential but structured way, providing integrated services. And of course, not forgetting the financial model, particularly on the employment zone, was one of a risk and reward, which actually meant the individuals got the service that they needed at the right time. Otherwise, you as a provider would either make some good money or lose a shed full of money. So there are some really good lessons to learn from the past. That's not the point I wanted to get to. In your chart, you showed some very high peaks in terms of potential referrals. Now, whether this is just a quirk of the Welsh landscape at the moment, because I have no visibility of elsewhere, we've come out of the lockdown period. We've managed to get our referral levels with the input of Job Centre Plus back up to that which we had prior to COVID. What is interesting, though, is that the registered count has gone up threefold. We have not seen the change in the referral volumes. So when we look at the future programs, for me, a potential single point of failure is the ability of Job Centre Plus to generate the referrals, particularly if it's a mandatory program. Because our programs at the moment, we would expect the programs to reflect the upturn in the number of people out of work. And for the last 3 months, they've not. They've not responded at all to that. So there is a significant worry that we have locally here in Wales around that capacity and capability. I'm not sure if colleagues would have a similar view on that, or maybe it's just a quirk of the Welsh environment at the moment.
Yeah, thanks, Gareth. I mean, I think the point about previous programmes before the New Deal is an important one. And actually, as a country, as the UK, we've got so much brilliant experience over decades about doing this stuff successfully, and we should try our best to learn from all of it rather than just well, politics always happens, doesn't it? But we need to learn from what. So I think the points you make there are spot on. In terms of the referral numbers, so as I said, the figures I've got on this chart here from April to June next year, these are total long-term unemployment. So the number of people claiming benefits is actually quite close to actual unemployment now for various good and bad reasons relating to universal credit. But the numbers who would be potentially eligible for referral, probably a bit, if they're going to do a benefit programme, which they are, will be a bit lower than this. But I guess we think that everyone who's out of work should be eligible for support, not just benefit claimants. And then the question, as you say, is, well, are Job Centre Plus going to refer them? And we know from the experience in the work programme, that there was post the end of Flexible New Deal. There was lots of people kind of held back, if you like, ready to put into these spikes of work programme referrals, and then it kind of ebbed and flowed across different bits of the country depending on the relationship between providers and Job Centre Plus and general attitudes and lots of other stuff. So that's kind of why we will definitely rerun the local figures that I mentioned to help then hopefully help providers to get a sense about, are we getting the right share of people here. I think Wales actually is a great example where there's so many more building blocks in place, I think, than in England with Working Wales and with the career service and with personal learning accounts that we've worked on the Welsh Government to do a trial of, and a different traineeship model and a whole bunch of other stuff. So I do think the Welsh Government and the Welsh system have got a great chance to make a real difference, and probably more of the building blocks than we have in England. But it'd be interesting to keep an eye on that. And then to Elizabeth's question, so I guess this conversation has been really helpful in kind of testing some of the thinking as we've gone through. So thank you for that. And then we are going to, as I say, we're going to rerun the numbers after the spending review, and also think as we go through, and probably we'll get into commissioning, won't we, shortly thereafter. What does this look like? How can we as an institute help? How can we work with you as providers? How can we think about what services work, what evidence we've got, what ideas you're hearing? So I think we'd like to sort of continue the dialogue, really, share the thinking as we go along, and kind of knock some ideas back and forth. And if there are ways that we can support you as providers, either when you're bidding or when you're successful or when you're delivering existing services or whatever it happens to be, we want our thinking to be informed by that reality, and we want what we're doing to be helpful to you. So I think tell us what you're hearing, tell us what you're seeing, tell us what would be useful. I'm very happy for these slides to be circulated round afterwards, if that would be helpful. And handily, on this last one, I've popped in my email address, and there's a hyperlink to the Time to Act reports, just in case it's lost in the depths of our website somewhere. So I think this conversation has been really useful. Keen to keep the conversation going and to make that a two-way thing, so that what we're doing is useful for you, and that what you're seeing and hearing is informing what we're doing as well. So thank you for the invite, it's much appreciated.
Well, I'd like to thank Stephen. I think that's been a really good contribution, a really good start to the CAEHRS forum, and I'm sure we'll be asking you to come back, Stephen. Certainly, if you send the slides to the team at ERSA, we'll get those out today. I posed some questions at the beginning about future forums. I think we'll meet again on that Friday, the 27th of November. We will start to shape agendas beyond that for January. But anybody, yeah, hiya.
I had a conference going on in the background then as well, which I'm watching, but I'm not talking. So my preference, given they've offered us Monday, and I was due on leave on Monday, but it's...
I think that's a conversation with somebody else, wasn't it? So yeah, if we meet again on through me completely Friday the 27th, yeah,
That's great.
we'll look at the spending review. Send me ideas things that you'd like to see at future meetings. Obviously, it will get steered by the ERSA team as well. But I hope that's been a good start. I think by the time we meet again, there may be announcements coming out of the DWP in terms of commissioning, if not then, soon after. But let's try and use this group to shape what might come beyond that big tier 1 announcement. There's a whole world of commissioning out there, isn't there? Seems to be upon us. So thanks.
I can't see the chat, Elizabeth. I think it also would be useful if each time there's a new research input from as well as your own work, from a think tank or whatever, just to keep on throwing that onto the ongoing agendas would probably help.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else before we all return to looking at our inboxes or whatever? Okay. Right. So thanks again, Stephen.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, bye.
Thank you.